All right, James chapter 4. Hit me.
When did the dress code change, man? I feel like I'm at the beach or something.
Hey. It's the summertime.
It's all 105 degrees. It's rough. James chapter 4, we're going to hit verse 13 all the way to 5:12. So we're going to get a good chunk. Now, James, the whole book of James has just been a series of tests, haven't it? Your test as far as how you weather a trial. Your test on how you control your tongue. A test on how you treat people according to their wrapper, to their package. A test on how you deal with sin. Right? This one is no different. This is probably one of the strongest texts that James gives. Probably one of the strongest rebukes in the letter. And it has to do with money. Anytime you start talking about money in a church, people just close their ears. And I understand, look, for the most part, you've got the health, wealth, prosperity that have hijacked the scriptures on giving, the principles on giving, and it's all been for the advancement and for the benefit of the pastor or for the guy out there selling his books or just peddling his wares, trying to get money, trying to fleece the sheep. But these principles here, man, that James lays down is really, really good. He's going to talk about our attitude towards wealth, what our attitude is towards wealth. Verses 13 all the way to 5:3. All right, so 4:13 to 5:3, he's going to talk about what our attitude needs to be on money or wealth. And then he's going to talk about from 4 to 6, verses 4 to 6, our actions. So our attitude, 4:13 to 5:3, our actions, because your attitude towards wealth is going to determine what you do with it, right? I mean, it's just basic. How you feel, what your perspective is on wealth will determine what you do with that wealth. And then the last part, he's going to talk about being all in. All in. So attitude, actions, verses 4 through 6, and all in, verses 6 through 12. All in, verses 6 through 12. Are you ready? Let me read you this to start out. This is really sobering. In 1923, a group of the world's most successful financiers met at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago. Collectively, these tycoons controlled more wealth than there was in the United States Treasury. And for years, newspapers and magazines had been printing their success stories and urging the youth of the nation to follow their examples. The richest men, the wealthiest men in the world at the time. Charles Schwab, the president of the largest independent steel company, lived on borrowed money the last 5 years of his life and died penniless. Arthur Cutten, the greatest wheat speculator, died abroad insolvent. Richard Whitney, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, was released some time ago from Sing Sing prison. Albert Fall, the member of the president's cabinet, was pardoned from prison so he could die at home. Jesse Livermore, the greatest bear on Wall Street, committed suicide. Leon Fraser, the president of the Bank of the International Settlement, committed suicide. Ivar Kruger, the head of the world's greatest monopoly, committed suicide. And on and on and on. The author writes, all of these men had learned how to make money, but not one of them had learned how to have the proper attitude and perspective towards it. That's pretty sobering, isn't it? And James is going to say the same thing about you and I as Christians. What is your relationship like with money? What is your attitude and your perspective? Okay? I got a funny story for you. So the credit card company calls up this guy and says, hey, we've noticed some strange activity going on your credit card. He goes, what's the number? And the guy reads the number off and he goes, oh, that's my wife's credit card. It was stolen about 2 months ago, but she's too afraid to tell me that somebody stole it. He says, man, you known it's been stolen for 2 months? How come you didn't report it stolen? He said, because the thief is spending less money than my wife. can relate. All right, so let's look at what James says our perspective needs to be when it comes to money. Verse 13, he says, "Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we would go to this city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow." So he's saying you're being presumptuous. We're going to stand up, we're going to go to this city, that city, make money, do some business. He says you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. You're not promised tomorrow. He said, what is your life? You're a mist, and the Greek word there is atmos, which we get our word atmosphere. You're a breath on a cold day. Your life is a mist that appears for a while and then vanishes. Instead, your perspective should be, when it comes to business, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. So when you get up and when you're working on business deals or your money and trying to build success in your kingdom, do you go to the Lord? Do you approach God and say, hey, what is it you would have me to do? And cover the business deals, cover your money making, cover everything that you do with prayer. You know who had to learn this the hard way in the Old Testament? Jacob. Jacob was shoot, ready, aim. He would jump up and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. He even tried to kibitz with God. He said, God, if you will do this, 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 and this for me, then I will make you my God. And what did God have to do to Jacob? You remember? He wrestled him all night long, and it says, and when he found he could not overpower the man, not meaning he was not strong enough, meaning that Jacob wouldn't say uncle, he touched his hip and dislocated. He wouldn't tap out. And so it says, and Jacob limped into the sunset. The path of the righteous is like the sunrise. The path of the righteous is like the first gleam of the dawn, shining ever so bright to the fullness of day. And he limped. Now, you know one of the greatest verses in the New Testament when you get to Hebrews? You know what it says about Jacob? Now watch this. And Jacob died leaning on his staff. And Jacob died leaning on his staff. Why is that a great verse? Why was he leaning on the staff? It was a constant reminder. Every time Jacob, after God wrestled with him, after God broke him like a wild horse, he'd jump up and say, well, let's go to this. Oh, wait a minute. We better check with God, right? What do you think about Peter? Every morning when he woke up, what did he hear? A rooster. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. It was a constant reminder. Let's check with God first. In the Old Testament with the kings, what happens when they don't check with God first before they go into battle? Ends up to be a disaster. You follow me? So he's saying, what's your perspective on wealth? What is your perspective on doing business? You better check with God. My perspective on wealth has to be, it's His, and He has allowed me to manage it, right? Amen. He has allowed me to manage it. Let me show you what God said to the Israelites. Keep your finger there. I want you to go all the way back to that nice white clean section in your Old Testament, Deuteronomy. Go ahead, peel the pages apart, man. I know. Look over there and see he's wrong. Got some notes back there, Deuteronomy 8. So Deuteronomy 8. So this is a duet nomos. It's the second law. So this is after 40 years of wandering in the desert. The next generation is going into the land. And so he's going to give a reiteration or a resuscitation of the law to this new generation. Now look in chapter 8, verse 6. 8:6. This is what Moses is saying to the Israelites. Observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in His ways and revering Him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and pools of water, with springs flowing in the valleys and hills, a land with wheat, barley, vines, and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce, and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron, and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land He has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe His commands, His laws, His decrees, that I'm giving you this day. Otherwise, now watch this, Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful desert, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the desert, something your fathers had never known, to humble and test you, that in the end it might go well with you. Remember, how did they have to live? You either gathered the bread in the morning, day by day. And if you slept in till noon, ain't no food. You got up, it was gone. And you couldn't lose weight. Yeah. And you couldn't gather any for the next day, right? Now look at this. Here's the stern warning. Verse 17. You may say to yourself, here's the problem. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He, now look at this, gives you the ability to produce wealth. It doesn't say it's He who gives you the wealth. It's He who gives you the ability to produce the wealth. So every penny you have, where does it come from? It comes from God. Well, wait a minute, you worked for it. You did the deals. You were the creative one. God is the source. That good? It is the Lord your God who's given you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms His covenant, which He swore to your forefathers as it is today. If you ever forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship and bow down to them, He says, I testify against you today that you will surely be destroyed. Like the nations the Lord destroyed before you, so you will be destroyed for not obeying the Lord your God. That's a pretty severe and strong warning, isn't it? Amen. Continue. Let's go back to James. So what should our attitude be of wealth? Everything I have is the result of God and His blessing. Isn't that right? I love people. It's like, well, I tithe 10%. I give God 10%. I said, you don't give God anything. You just should be glad that God allowed you to keep 90% of His money. Right? So watch, James continues in verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast and you brag. All such boasting is evil. What are they boasting and bragging about? Look at this great business deal that I just put together, man. He said, no, don't do that. Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do, it does not do it, sins. Now watch this. The rebuke continues. Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Now those Greek words are strong. Weep is kaleo in the Greek, which means to sob out loud unceasingly, to lament with great volume. Wail is the word alaluzo. It's kind of like an onomatopoeic word. You know what an onomatopoeic word is? It sounds like it's spelled like flush, whoosh. Alaluzo, wailing. It's an outburst of violent, despairing, uncontrolled grief. Those are some strong words. Now, one thing let me just take a side note. James is not condemning wealth. James is not condemning the making of wealth, is he? What's he condemning? The love of it, the wrong attitude of it, the wrong perspective. I mean, in the Old Testament, God says the gold of the land is good. It's good. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. So he says, listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. Man, those are some strong words. And so what's he saying about wealth? What should your attitude be towards wealth? It's God's. Whatever He's given you, you have to be a good steward of it. It's that simple. Your perspective of your money should be such, not what you can build for you, not what you can acquire, but what you can build and acquire for God. Isn't that right? One guy said, tithe in proportion to your income, or God will adjust your income in proportion to your tithe. Ouch. That's strong. Mark Bailey, one of the professors at DTS, I think one of the best. I think some of you guys know Mark Bailey. Yep. He said something, and I'll never forget, I was a young Christian. He said, make sure everything that God gives you, you hold it out there with an open hand. He said, because the minute that you do this, it's going to hurt like hell when God has to pry open your fingers to get what rightfully belongs to him. Strong. Strong. Let me interrupt right here and give you, before we look at the actions, because the attitude will determine the actions. What are the attitude of these people? Well, we're going to jump up and we're going to do business according to our schedule. No, you better check with God. You rich people, you wicked, wealthy people, padding your pockets and building your kingdom instead of God's. He says everything you have is going to be gone. Another thing Mark Bailey said, look at everything you have and just picture in big, bright red letters on the side of your house, on your new car, reserved for fire. Because that's where it's reserved for fire. Let me give you real quick. I'm going to give you 4 biblical principles on money. 4 biblical principles on money, and then I'm going to give you a 6-point gut check. All right? Here's 4 principles on money. Number 1, money belongs to God. We've been talking about that. Money belongs to God. Psalm 24:1. Money belongs to God. Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and what? Everything in it. The fullness therein. That's Psalm 24:1. Proverbs 22:2. Proverbs 22:2. The rich and the poor, the Lord is the maker of them all. That's Proverbs 22:2. Proverbs 10:22. It's the blessing, Proverbs 10:22. It's the blessing of the Lord that makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. Let me ask you, is this a new principle when it comes to James?
No.
Is James reiterating someone who said something about money years before he wrote his epistles? Who is he quoting in a sense? Yeah, definitely Solomon. I mean, you look at all the verses that Solomon gives on money, and he was the wealthiest man in the world. He said, take but a glance at wealth, for surely it will sprout wings as eagles and fly off. But give me somebody after Solomon, before James and after Solomon. I'll give you a hint, it was James's brother. What did he say about wealth? Make sure you store up wealth in heaven. You take what resources God has given you here and you pay it forward. You pay it forward. I told you I'm bringing you a book. I got a book for every one of you. This is probably the best book I've ever read. Brother Gary gave it to me. I read it one night. I couldn't believe it. It's called The Law of Rewards by Randy Alcorn. He wrote the best book on heaven. Every one of you, don't get one of these before we leave. It's phenomenal. And that's what he's saying. Quit looking at money as a means in which you can get stuff here. There's nothing wrong with getting stuff here. Nothing wrong with enjoying what God has given you. But is that your priority? Is that your heart? Because Jesus said, where your heart lies, so also lies your treasure. Pay it forward. Would you rather get rewards here that can be depleted and used up, or you get rewards in heaven that will never deplete? They'll never diminish. That was a mind blower to me when I read that in the book. They'll never diminish. The rewards you have will be paying dividends for hundreds and thousands and trillions of years. The widow's mine? Yeah. So number 1, the money belongs to God. You're just a manager of it. Never forget that. It's all his. Number 2, all believers are commanded to give. All believers are commanded to give. In the Old Testament, guess how much they were supposed to give? They were commanded. God commanded Israel because he knew they wouldn't. He commanded them to give. Do you know how much they had to give? Because I always get the question, how much should I give? A tithe is a tenth. Should I tithe on the gross or the net? I get these questions.
Oh, yeah.
My response is always, do you want God to bless you on your gross or your net? How much were they supposed to give in the Old Testament? Do you know, Ron?
About 15%. So
More.
18%, somewhere.
More. Keep coming.
So they were like 4 different tithes, 10%. Yeah.
Keep coming. Yeah, so total of about 33 and a third.
33. Okay.
33 and a third they're supposed to give. They're supposed to give to the poor, and we're commanded to give to 3 areas. We're supposed to give to the needy, you're supposed to give to the church, and you're supposed to support mission groups and ministries that are out there building the kingdom. Those are the areas that we're commanded to give. How much are we supposed to give? If we're commanded to give, how much are we supposed to give? Everybody wants to say tenth. There's nowhere in the New Testament that says we're supposed to give a tenth. You know that? Can't find it. Jesus said to the Pharisees, you tithe, you give a tenth of mint and cumin. You strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. You guys are corrupt. And remember, he talked about how the Pharisees would go give money. They would take, let's say they were going to give $100. They would turn it into coins, and they would go to the temple. The temple area had pots, big brass pots where you put your money.
Make a lot of noise.
They make a lot of noise. They even blow trumpets. They're going, oh, Brother Troy, man, he must have given a gazillion dollars. Listen to that. Right? And the widow's mites, they were paper thin. Couldn't even hear them. And Jesus said he gave more. What were you going to say, Bill?
Well, just quickly, I think it comes down to guarding the heart. I don't look at it as a transaction, but where's the heart?
Yeah.
And I'll just give you 2 examples. I like earthly examples, because I didn't know any of those people in the Old Testament. And I've had a great experience. One was Tim LaHaye. And I know these for a fact. But, you know, they sold probably $1.5 billion worth of left behind them. And when he passed on, he'd given every dime away. I'm sure a lot went to the government. But he gave it all away. And I remember sitting down there in Singapore when we had this federal judge. If we go to the Department of Justice on my behalf, but he wanted 50 grand. Tim says, if I last 50 grand, I'm going to do it. No, but don't tell Ben. Second example. Who was the largest donor to the Focus of the Family? Jim Dawson. Took no salary. Third thing people don't realize is that all of his books that were sold through Focus of the Family, he let them keep the royalties. Now those are things you don't hear about, you don't even think about. And I think what we have to have is a vision for what we want to do, and then ask God for the money because He's got lots of it.
Amen.
We've got to have that vision.
Look, you can't outgive God. There was a gal, she wore a necklace. She had 2 shovels on her. She had a gold shovel, a big one, and another shovel next to it, a little gold shovel. And when you'd ask her what the necklace meant, she said, well, the little one represents what I give to God, and the big one represents what He gives back to me. You can't outgive God. Jesus said, give, and it'll be given to you, pressed down, shaken, and running over. For with the same measure you give, it'll be given back to you. Now, again, those verses have been so plagiarized and so misused, it just irritates me. I'd rather focus in, I think, on what James is and what Jesus is and what this book does, is paying it forward. You're taking the resources God has given you today and you're building rewards in heaven. And a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, isn't that the wrong motive? Well, sure, God would love you to just be giving and doing what you do out of your heart of love and obligation to Him. But even Jesus knew humans get motivated by rewards. And if it's okay for Jesus to say, store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust cannot eat, thieves can't come and steal, then that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that motive. Because if you have that perspective, your actions are going to be, we're going to build His kingdom. All right? So number 1, money belongs to God. Number 2, all believers are commanded to give. Paul simply says everyone should give what they have set aside in their hearts to give. It's between you and God. It's between you and God. With a cheerful heart. Okay, number 3, when you give, now this is a biggie. When you give, you are given to God. When you give, you are giving to God. Listen, a lot of you guys have given a lot to this ministry. Very generously. Unbelievable. But you're not giving it to me, you're giving it to God. When you give to a person that needs a meal, or if you're trying to help a guy that's homeless or out on the corner, you're doing that not so much for his benefit, but for God's, right? What you're saying to God is, Lord, you got my wallet. If the Lord doesn't have your wallet, he doesn't have you. It's that simple. And it's rigged. Money is an umbilical cord for life. You can't do anything without it, correct? You need it to eat, to have a house, to have clothing, to live. And God wants that. He wants you completely dependent upon him for everything. And by the way you give, what you're saying to him is, I'm all yours. He's going to talk about later on. Are you all in? So when you give, you're giving to God. I think I told you this gal, this little girl in church, the collection plate was going around. The plate got to her. She stepped out in the aisle. She put the plate on the ground. She stepped in the plate. People were laughing and snickering. And her parents grabbed her. What are you doing? What are you doing? She says, I'm giving it all to Jesus. That's pretty good. She stepped in. All right? Nothing clearly reveals the state of a person's heart than his view of money. Right? So number one, money belongs to God. Number two, all believers are commanded to give. Number three, when you give, you are giving to God. Number four, give him your best. Give him your best. Don't give him the leftovers. In the Old Testament, what did God command Israel to do? The best crops, the best cattle. And again, it's the only place in your Bible that God tells you to test him. It's a challenge. Isn't it? You test me. You give and not see if I open up the heavens and give it back. Now listen, you may be giving all your life and still be scraping along with a beat up car that's got 300,000 miles on it and everything else. You may be giving and giving and giving, but what you're going to get may not necessarily be here on this earth. Right? The rewards that you're going to get back may be in heaven. Okay? So when you give him your best. You give him your best. Now think about this. Who loses out if I don't give to God?
You do.
You do, man. God doesn't need your money. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. If I don't give, I'm the one who loses out, not God. God can raise up people and worshipers from rocks. He can definitely raise up money anywhere he wants. So you're the one losing out. Why let somebody else rob you of your blessing? There's one guy, man, he always takes me out to lunch and I try to pay. He goes, nope, don't you rob me of my blessing. That's what he always says. All right. Well, then in that case,
I want this to
I'll take a T-bone over here. Yeah. All right. So there's your attitude. Now let's take a look at the action. Because if the attitude is wrong, obviously the action's going to be bad. So back in James chapter 5. James chapter 5. Look at 3b. 3b. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. So if your perspective is wrong, if your love is for money and for stuff and for temporal gain, what are you going to do? You become greedy. We have watched our nation become so corrupt and starting to implode, I should say because of greed. Because of greed. Let me ask you a question. How easy is it for you to deal with your insurance companies today? How easy is it for you to deal with pharmacies, phone companies? And it's like pulling teeth. I'll give you a great example. So I get a recall on my vehicle. So I take it in, and it's a wiring harness that they're supposed to look at. And if it's corroded, they'll replace it. If it's not, no big deal. I get an email of 11 things that have to be done to my vehicle. A complimentary inspection, they call it. $6,000 later, they said that my vehicle will be up to snuff. I said, no, thank you. Just give me back my car. Isn't that ridiculous?
What about the bank charging you to get your money back?
Oh, I know. Listen, we got all the horror stories. We can tell. But look what it says. They've hoarded wealth in the last days. Now look at James. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields is crying out against you. If you love money more than you do the things of God, what happens? You'll hoard it. You'll get greedy. You'll rip people off. The love of money is the root of all evil because it causes you to be dishonest. When you love money more than you love God, what's it cause you to do? He says, the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who were not opposing you. I mean, look at all the movies out there. I mean, you got people that are just, they'll rob, they'll steal, they'll kill. Look at today, for money. So if the attitude is wrong, what's James saying? The actions follow. The actions follow. Rockefeller said this, I have made many millions, but they have brought me no happiness. John D. Rockefeller. The care of 200 million is enough to kill anyone. There is no pleasure in it. Vanderbilt said that. I am the most miserable man on earth. John Jacob Astor said that. What can I say? I only know I am desolate. That's John Paul Getty. These are all gazillionaires. I was happier when doing a mechanic's job. Henry Ford. I was happier when I was doing a mechanic's job. Henry Ford. Millionaires seldom smile. Andrew Carnegie.
There's an old kind of proverb we had back in the neighborhood back in the day. It said, a rich man has many words, but a poor man has but few.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, and Solomon said that.
Right.
Solomon said that. I found this really interesting. In the book of sermons, Clovis Chappell says that when Pompeii was being excavated, if you've ever seen the excavations of Pompeii, the ash entombed people. You could see the wrinkles on their face. It was so incredibly detailed.
Amazing.
This is what they found when they were excavating those people out of the entombment of the ash. Says that when Pompeii was being excavated, there was found a body that had been embalmed by the ashes of Vesuvius. It was of a woman. Her feet were torn. Her feet were turned toward the city gate, but her face was turned backward towards the city, something that lay just beyond her outstretched hands. The prize for which those frozen fingers were reaching for was a bag of pearls.
A bag of what?
A bag of pearls. And they found that a lot. You know, people ran back to their houses to get their treasures and died with them.
Amazing tour for everybody.
Oh, yeah. Really?
Best trip.
You know, I'm sorry to flip this past you. You talk a lot about wealthy people, but no one ever talks about the great things they did.
Yeah.
And Andrew Carnegie is one of them.
Yes.
And Roosevelt hated him so much because he cut taxes for 20 years. Coolidge, next to Reagan, those are the only two great presidents.
Yeah. Look at Rockefeller. He created the Rockefeller Center. We wouldn't have penicillin if it wasn't for him.
But Henry Ford, he doubled the wages of his employees in one day.
Yeah.
And the other thing he did, he had advisors that go to their house, help them financially plan, make sure they were taking care of their families, and their kids had shoes. Who does that? And that's never told people.
Yeah.
And
You're good. All right, so let me stop here before we get into all in. All right, so the next point is all in. So what's your attitude towards wealth? It's God's. You're just a steward, a money manager of what he has blessed you with. And the better manager you are, the more he's going to give you. And what should you be doing? What should be the actions of your giving your wealth? If your attitude is right, to build the kingdom, pay it forward. Pay it forward. Now, let me do this before we get in that. Go to Luke chapter 16. Let's go to Luke 16. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a 6-point gut check to see what your attitude is towards money so we can all feel good together. Look at Luke 16. I love this parable. Parables a lot of times are true to life. A parable, parabolo in the Greek, is a story, a heavenly truth cast alongside an earthly reality. So when God is trying to convey heavenly principles to a Gentile people, they don't know the Old Testament, so he tells stories. right? We talked about it, like Aesop's fables. We try to convey good and evil, right and wrong, through parables. That's what Jesus does. In 61, he uses a bad example or a bad circumstance for a good example. So Luke 16:1, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. And so he called him and asked him in, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be my manager any longer. So this is a dishonest money manager. You ever have a dishonest accountant? I mean, you hear stories about it all the time. They just rip off the owner. So this guy is cooking the books. And the manager finds out and he calls him in and it says, you get your house in order, put your junk in a box because I'm going to fire you. And I'm going to take great pleasure in firing you. The manager said to himself, now watch this. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. Now wait a minute. Why is he losing his job? He blames his master. No, man, you're a thief. You getting fired. No, my manager is taking away my job. Or my boss is taking away, my master is taking away my job. Now look at this. I'm not strong enough to dig, i.e. lazy, and I'm too ashamed to beg, i.e. prideful. So he's a dishonest, lazy, prideful accountant. But he's shrewd. And this is where Jesus is going to key in. He is shrewd. The manager said to him, then he says, verse 4, I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job, look at that. Again, he won't own it. When I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. And so he called in each one of his master's debtors. And he asked the first one, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. He cuts it in half. Now, he's not doing anything dishonest here. The master would allow the accountant to charge so much money over and above what the master had to get. You follow me? Yeah, so he could gouge him a little bit more. He could charge whatever he wanted. This is what the master needed for his product. Whatever he wanted to charge above and beyond, he got the pocket. Kind of like what the tax collectors were doing during Jesus' time. So all he did was just cut his portion. Make it half. Now, this is shrewd. How come? How come? What's going to happen when the master fires him? I mean, because think about it.
He's going to have goodwill and
Oh, yeah. Look at the next guy. Then he asked the second, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He said to him, take your bill, make it 800. So this is shrewd because here's what's happening. Number one, the master has to fire him because he's dishonest. There's no way that he can sleep at night knowing that this guy's still in charge of his books. Number two, who's going to look bad when he gets fired? The master. Wait a minute. How can you fire this guy? Because you know, if somebody sits down and cuts your mortgage in half, you're going to sit there going, man, if I have another kid, I'm going to name him after you. Right? This is all good. So you know they're going, oh, praise be to God. Oh, you're a gracious man. So he's winning these people over. He's looking good. The master's going to look bad. How can you fire such a great guy? And what happens is when he does fire him, the people are going to take him in. And you would think the master could kind of recoup some of the money that this guy stole, but he can't go back and renege on him forgiving the debt. So he's boxed in. He has to fire him. He cannot go back on what this guy's doing as far as forgiving the debt. When he does fire him, he's going to be welcomed in. They'll probably throw a party for the guy. Now look at this. Verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager. Huh? I think he called him in and sat there and just shook his head. Went, you know something? I'm going to take great pleasure in firing you, but you are a shrewd man. Right? Because he knows he's got him. I have to fire you, but man, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Now, the Greek word there is phroneo. A phrenologist is one who studies the bumps on your head. Phrenesimos means being shrewd with the bumps on your head, being shrewd with your mind. Now, Jesus stops right there. That's a bad situation. A dishonest, prideful, lazy man who acted shrewdly. Now, watch the application. Brilliant. Brilliant. For the people of this world are more shrewd, there's that word again, phreneo, in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. That's a strong statement. What's he saying? The unbelievers are more shrewd in using their resources to make more money than you and I, who are children of the light, connected to the creative juices, if you want, of God to win people to Christ. They are more creative, more shrewd. Yeah, for temporarily, for temporal stuff than you and I for advancing the kingdom. We should be more creative. We're the billboards that says 1-800-DON'T-BURN, or something like that, right? Why aren't we using our resources? And this is a rebuke from the Lord. He says, why aren't you using your resources as shrewdly as the pagans are to make money for themselves than to advance the kingdom of Christ? What a great statement. And watch what he says. I tell you, verse 9, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when, circle that underline, highlight it, when it fails, your money will fail. One of the greatest things he says in this book, he says when the Civil War ended, if you had Confederate money, you had to get rid of it because there was going to be a certain day when that money was worthless. The money that you have now, there's going to come a day when you die, we put you in a box where your money's worthless. Someone said, make sure you run out of air and money at the same time. Make sure your last check bounces. Right? Because when you die, everybody's going to start fighting over your stuff. Give it all away. The Bible doesn't tell you to leave anything for your kids. You know that? Don't leave an inheritance for your kids. Who does the Bible tell you to leave an inheritance to? To your grandkids. That's solid. That's smart. That's wise. Jesus says, when your wealth is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Man, what a powerful verse. So what's he saying, man? You and I take our resources, pay it forward. What are you doing to advance and to build the kingdom? When you give money to ministries, when you give money to missions, when you give money to the needy, when you give money to your church, you get rewards for all that. You're paying it forward. Depending on what you do with your money is what kind of welcome you'll have when you get to heaven. Can you imagine getting to heaven? I forget what basketball coach it was, but they started a deal that if someone assisted you to make a basket, the guy who made the basket had to point to the guy who assisted him. Was it North Carolina? I think we talked about this before. Who? He started that, and then what happened was the whole team would start doing it, and then the whole bleachers would do it. You, right? I made the basket because of you. When you get to heaven, how many people are going to be pointing to you going, you, I'm here because of you. You give money to a missionary, you give money to a ministry, every person that ministry affects, you get a reward for it. Did you know that? That's the coolest multi-level marketing scheme ever known to man, and Jesus invented it. And you get paid infinite numbers, deep and wide. Multi-levels, you only sometimes go like 7 down or something. And God figures it all out. Jesus said the reaper and the sower will rejoice together. You may sow the seeds. You may be given the money. You may be supporting. But the person who gets reaped from that gets the reward. I told you I did this Bible study with a bunch of really wealthy guys. And we went through this text, and I said, you know what some of the best investing you could do with your money? I said, why don't you pay for somebody to go through seminary? I knew a bunch of guys at the time were getting ready to start seminary. I said, why don't you pay for their seminary education? It's nothing for you guys. And guess what? Every person that they affect, when they're out there in the ministry, you get a reward for it. Can you imagine if you put Billy Graham through seminary? It'd be mind staggering. Okay? Now watch the rest of James and then I'll close with this gut check. Go back to James. Go back to James and look what he says. Are you all in? I like this. James chapter 5, we'll finish it out. He says, be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. Now watch the example he uses. The word patience in the Greek is macrothumea. Macrothumea is the word patience. Thumea means pain. Pain in the Greek. What's macro? Bunches of it, a lot. Macrothumea is pain. So he's saying, man, you make sure you have the right attitude towards your wealth. You make sure that your actions follow your right attitude, and you keep doing it until Jesus comes or he takes you home. You be all in. And I love the example. Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient, stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Do not grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. You keep it on, right? I love the example of a farmer. What's a farmer do? He plants the seeds. He prays. He waits for the water, for the rains to come. And all he can do is sit. It's out of his control. He plants. He waits. Because he knows at some point what's going to happen. His environment is going to radically change. Am I right? So those crops are going to come up. His life is going to radically change. You and I keep throwing the seeds. You and I keep advancing the kingdom. You and I keep using the resources God has given us because we know at some point what's going to happen. Our lives are going to radically change, are they not? Either he's going to come and set up his kingdom or we're going to get raptured out or we're going to die. But either way, we keeping on. Don't grow weary in doing good. We spur one another on to love and good deeds. Isn't that good? I love the example of a farmer. Now he keeps going on. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. Look, man, we all take hits. James talked about it at the beginning with trials. You just got to keep going. You pick yourself up, you keep moving. Yeah, but I'm doing this with my money. I've done that. And man, now I'm having a hard time with my mortgage. You keep on keeping on. Look at Job. How did Job's life end?
Well, back on top tenfold.
Back on top tenfold. Good, man. I like the way you put that. Back on top tenfold. He says, you keep going. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers, do not swear by heaven or earth or by anything else. Let your yes be yes and your no's no's. From the talk, what's he say? Walk the walk. Isn't that a good text? It's a good text. It's a sober reminding for you and I of what we do with our wealth. Now, can I give you this? Hold on for just a second. Yeah, let me give you this real quick because we're out of time. We got about 5 minutes. This is just kind of a gut check when it comes to money. Just a gut check. 6 things. Number 1, how can you tell if money is your master? Here's the gut check. How can you tell if money is your master? Because Jesus said you can't serve both. You'll love the one and hate the other. So this is a little test for you and I to see how to tell if money is my master. Number 1, if you think about it or worry about it the majority of your time. If you think and worry about it the majority of your time. If you think and worry about it the majority of your time. So number 1, are you thinking and worrying about money the majority of the time that you're awake? It's a good indicator. Proverbs 15:17. Proverbs 15:17. Better a plate of vegetables and a house of peace than the fattened calf and a house of strife. Better having a little bit and having peace and tranquility than a lot. Because with a lot of money, a lot of times comes what? A lot of headaches, a lot of problems. Number 2, do you give up what you should do or would do to make money? Do you give up what you should do or would do to make money? Meaning, well, I should go on vacation with my family. I should spend some time with my kids. I should spend some time with my wife. Every one of y'all better be going on date nights. I'm going to start challenging you. You better have a date night once a week. Okay? Where you initiate it and you take your wife out. I don't care if it's just a Mickey D's or a movie, something. Right? So, are you giving up what you should do to make money? Okay? And again, you can put in there to steal or to be dishonest. Workaholic. Ecclesiastes 5:10. Whoever loves money, Ecclesiastes 5:10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied. Number three, do you constantly look for ways to make money? Do you constantly look for ways to make money even on vacation? Even sitting in a movie theater? I told you, some of these people, man, you don't want to go on vacation with them because they're sitting there on the beach trying to figure out how to put a floating 7-Eleven out on off the shore, right? Constantly trying to figure out how to make money. There's nothing wrong with being a pragmatic businessman. There is if you're not where you are supposed to be in the moment, right? So do you constantly look for ways to make money even on vacation or Christmas, Thanksgiving or something where you're supposed to be there? Number 4. So good. Number 4, how much time you spend on your possessions. How much time you spend on your possessions? Acquiring them, waxing them, maintaining them. If you're spending the majority of your time acquiring and caring for your possessions, there could be a problem. Jesus said in Luke 12:15, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Right? You always hear the saying, there's no U-Hauls following a funeral procession. There's no pockets on a casket. Can't take it with you. Number 5. You know that money is your master if it's hard for you to give it away. If it's hard for you to give it away. You should freely give. You cannot outgive God. So many times my wife and I talk about giving money and she says, God will give it back. I'm not worried about it. Go, give it. She doesn't even hesitate. Give it. So you know money is your master if it's hard to give it away. Proverbs 11:24. One gives freely and grows richer, but another withholds and comes to ruin. That's Proverbs 11:24. And the last point, here's a biggie. You know money is your master if you have excessive debt. Boy, our nation has become what? What's the personal debt in our nation right now, Bill? Do you know? Trillions, isn't it? And there was a shift. There was a shift now where you had mama and daddy having to go to work just to keep up with the Joneses. And now you've got daycares raising your kids. I told you one of the greatest sales techniques that one of the greatest sales technique that a guy came up, a door-to-door salesman. He'd knock on the door and he'd say, let me show you what your neighbor said you couldn't afford.
Oh, yeah, he was good. He was good.
I think he was one of those Hoover guys,
He was good.
Excessive debt. You don't have to have the latest and the greatest to keep up with the Joneses, right? I'm done. Isn't that good? Let me leave you with this. Nathan C. Schaefer said, at the close of life, the question will not be how much you have got, but how much you have given. Not how much you have won, but how much you have done. Not how much you have saved, but how much you have sacrificed. Not how much you were honored, but how much have you served. Boy, that is good. Right? Huh? Schaefer. So make sure, listen, man. Make sure you all get one of these books. I'm telling you, it'll bless you. It's probably one of the best books that I have ever read. All right? So we'll give those out. Let me close this in prayer.